So, welcome to Chai. Before I formally introduce today's speaker, I wish to make a couple of announcements. On 1st of March, that is the first Saturday of the coming month, TIFR will be celebrating National Science Day. So, the institute will be open for visits. More details can be found on our webpage. So, you all are welcome to visit TIFR on the 1st of March. Then about upcoming program here, the next program here will be on 2nd of March, that is the first Sunday of the month of March, and it will be given by Dr. Anand Sawant. He is a mathematician, and it will be a really interesting talk about I'll let it. It's about something which I really don't wish to disclose at this moment, simply to keep the curiosity up. But take my word for it. It's a very interesting topic. The next session of Chai and Why on February 16 will be a topic on biology. It will be on cell-to-cell communication. And now I wish to introduce today's speaker. It's an honor for me to introduce today's speaker. Today's speaker is Professor Sushil Mujumdar. He is a professor at the Department of Nuclear and Atomic Physics at TIFR. And before joining TIFR in the year 2006, he completed his PhD degree at RRI Bangalore. This was followed by postdoctoral stints in the Western world. And then he chose to come back to India. So now, at present, he heads his research group in nuclear and molecular, did I say something wrong? Yeah. Molecular optics laboratory at TIFR. And today he is going to discuss about quantum communication with us. So, Professor, all yours.
Thank you. Are we online with this?
Please start the screen share.
Can you confirm? Can you confirm online?
Yeah. There's a deal. It's gone into the presenter mode. Just give us a moment. Bear with us for a minute. Oh, no, this one. Not yet.
Wasn't it fine a few minutes ago before we actually started the show?
No?
Sorry, guys, this worked fine. 10 minutes before you all came in, we had tested it. Okay, while he's struggling at it, can I ask how many of you have been exposed to some general talks on quantum communication? Okay, how many have been exposed to quantum computation? Ready? Okay, Abhishek. Okay, again, apologies for this unexpected issue here. And thanks, Ullas, for this very generous introduction. I'd like to thank Arnab, Ullas, and all his team doing outreach for this very honorable invitation. Chai and YE is considered a very honorable platform to discuss our science. And I must thank all of you because I know it's not easy on a Sunday morning to expose yourself to science. I'll try and do as much justice to your time. So my name is Sushil. Like Ullas explained, we are in this lab primarily dealing with quantum communication, quantum key distribution. I'll explain the topics. And I believe some of you may be familiar with typical characters playing the game of quantum communication. Okay, the names Alka and Babu have been chosen by design. I'll come to why these names figure here. And my actual intention here is, if I succeed at that, is to give you a brief flavor of where the actual security comes from. Okay, and I try and convince you that the security is not in the technology, it's in the physics of quantum mechanics. I've tried my best to bring it down. Sorry, I should not say the word down. I've tried my best to bring it to daily experiences, but it's not easy. So I'll be very happy to discuss out issues that I could not clarify. Now, like any presentation done by us faculty, we must acknowledge the hard work which is done by group members. They do all the hard work. We only look good giving talks. So I'd gladly acknowledge all my students, postdocs, and staff members who put energy and time in the lab, because of which we can get some results in the lab. What I'll do in the next 45 minutes, I believe is the time, is walk you through 3 nuggets in this presentation. Firstly, I'll convince you why do we need quantum communication. Okay, is something wrong with the current communication? We will see. You can tell me the answer later. And I'll actually walk you through the basics of measurement. Therein lies the secret. The actual secret lies in the process of making measurements in quantum mechanics. And I'm going to actually work out with you in real time. The most famous protocol currently used is called BB84. Okay, I'll explain the term. We'll actually sit down one by one and understand. It will be done on the board, and I hope I can walk you through how the aspects of BB84 are unfolding. In the end, if you're interested, I'll discuss something about what the world is moving towards, what the world wants to move towards. If this part becomes too technical, I'll gladly skip it, but we'll just have a small chat about it. Okay, so let's get going. I don't know if you're allowed to ask questions, so I'll let Ullas take that in the middle of the talk. Okay, great. Okay, that's usually very good. Okay, so let's start with discussing the importance of secure communication. It's not that you don't know that, but I want to actually do a practical demonstration of that, for which I have created 2 blobs of paper. Each one carries a message, okay, in very simple English, and I need 2 volunteers who can read loudly. Raise your hands, any of you, very simple English. 2 volunteers who can read loudly.
You'll have to come on the stage and read.
No, I'll throw it to you.
You'll have to come here.
Okay, for the camera. Okay, I didn't know that. Anybody, or I'll throw randomly and I would expect one of you to pick it up. Okay, can you? Okay, then please. Thanks. You have to just make sure that the whole audience is able to hear you. As soon as you open it, start reading. Oh, sorry. Too dark for you?
No, let's pump this lecture and go to the
Next.
One second. What did you say again?
Let's pump this lecture and go to the movie.
Is that what you're reading?
So MEFT,
What are you reading?
MEFT, COG, you'll gibberish and MIPS, your HP, UP, UFI.
You have done a better job than most students have exposed to this message. Is that what you're reading?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. You did a great job. Okay, this helps a lot. So, ladies and gentlemen, what the two read is two messages. Okay, this is what the first one read very clearly, confidently, and loudly, and this is what the second one read. Unfortunately, you could easily understand what the first student was reading. You could not understand what the second one was reading because what he did was he did a smart act of encrypting his message. Okay, he encrypted it so that none of you could understand. And the assumption here is his friend sent him this message after deciding on a prior encryption technique. Now, one quick look at the message will reveal what the encryption technique is. All that he has done, he has replaced each letter with the next one. L becomes M, E becomes F, T becomes U, and so on. Okay, so we're all smart guys. So he tried to act smart, but we all read through his message, and we all know that he's also asking his friend to bunk the lecture and go to the movies. Okay, so let's get some terminology correct. The simple, straightforward message in English, like this one, once it is decoded, is called plain text. Okay, so if I happen to use the word plain text, in cryptography, it means what I'm speaking to you, what the message actually is. The message which is encoded, the encrypted, is called the cipher text. Okay, so the cipher is basically the puzzle. It's a cipher text. Okay, and the idea of how to decode the message into simple English is the key. The word key is that tiny secret which will enable you to decode any cipher text into its corresponding plain text. Okay, now you can understand something easy. The key can be sent privately to someone, and the actual cipher text can be sent publicly. As long as your key is secure, the other person, the bad guys, are never going to understand what this message is, right? You have to be very careful about preserving the security of the key. Okay, the entire game of communication in general relies on making the key as secure as possible. Now, the term private channel as against public channel means private channel means something really protected. Public channel means it can be spoken, sent through phone, WhatsApp, whatever you want, okay? And there's something else you can understand. The actual length of the message could be anything. I could send my entire thesis encrypted, and the key could still be very small. Use the preceding alphabet. That's all I'm sending, right? The key can be very small. Information theoretical people don't like this statement, but for today's discussion, we'll stick to it. Okay, the key can be small, the message can be as large as possible, so it is efficient to only communicate the key. Forget worrying about the security of the message, all right? Let's get started on that first. Some terms are clear here. Now, as I said, my friend thought he was being smart by making a key, but you guys are smarter, you could decode it. There have been very smart keys made before this, okay? And I'll start with a very favorite story of mine. There's a story by Arthur Conan Doyle involving Sherlock Holmes. It's called The Adventure of the Dancing Men. How many of you have read this? Oh, I'm glad you have not. Oh, you have. Thank you, sir. Okay, it just shows we are in the same age bracket, that's all. What you see here, people, what you see here is a series of cartoons. A child drawing men dancing, some holding flags in various characters, okay? I'll tell you that this is actually a cipher text. It's an encoded message. The actual message behind this is absolutely ominous. What it says is, Elsie, prepare to meet thy God. Proper death threat to Miss Elsie. The guy who wrote this script thought he was very smart, like our friend here. But then there are always smarter people in the world. Sherlock Holmes decoded this message using a very clever piece of logic. What does Holmes say is, he wrote down this message and many other messages that were received and simply asked the question, which of these characters appears maximally in all these messages? And then he says, in English language, the alphabet E appears maximally in an average sentence. One by one, he puts things together and he decodes this message, okay? Point that I'm trying to make is, however smart an encoding and encryption algorithm you make, there's always going to be someone smarter than you who can find a way to crack it, okay? Just in passing, how many of you identify Jeremy Brett as Sherlock Holmes? Exactly the same problem, okay? And I'm sure the rest of you will go with either Cumberbatch or Downey Jr. Not at all. They don't, not even close. Anyway, thank you for this. I'm glad to receive the support because I only give these talks in colleges and all, and nobody even recognizes Brett. But people, let's go on. Okay, now here's a story. The cleverest encryption algorithm that is being used commercially right now is called the RSA. I believe you have heard the name RSA algorithm. The name comes from the authors, Rivest, Shamir, Adelman. It uses a key, okay, which is derived from a large integer, okay, derived from a large integer. Mandatory requirement is this large integer has to be a product of two large prime numbers, okay? And there is a reason for that. If I give a talk on quantum computation, I'll discuss this in detail, but this is about communication. All I will say is our computers, which we are using currently, they find the process of factorizing is very difficult. For whatever reason, the way the algorithms have been written, factorizing a number is difficult. Factorizing large integers becomes more and more difficult when the integers become larger and larger, okay? And that is the security promise that we are right now relying on, okay? If somebody says, I can break your key, the other guy says, okay, I'll simply make the integer larger. So you will not be able to break my key. But the problem here is, this is only difficult. It is not impossible, okay? It's just a matter of building the stronger computer, okay? So future computers may be able to crack large factorizations that are difficult now, which means our data is secure now. It's not forward secure. The concept of forward security means whatever encryption you have now, it should not be broken by some advanced technology later, okay? This is the dangling sword that we are currently living under. And you can't afford this kind of vulnerability. Why? Because sometimes stakes can be absolutely high. We are not talking about simple retirement savings. We're talking about the future of entire countries. How many of you identify this device? Name it, please. All of you. Oh my God, that's a very special audience. This is the Enigma, which when created by the Nazi Germans, thought it was impossible to crack. Every alphabet is encrypted onto some other alphabet by a very complex series of operations through this device, which could only be reproduced by another identical device, okay? For whatever reason, it was cracked by Alan Turing and his team. And I believe that effort is considered as one of the pioneering efforts of building modern computers. But leave that aside, okay? The story here is, most war experts believe that Nazi Germany lost the war because of Enigma, okay? And the reason is not because Enigma was hacked. That's not the reason. Reason is not because Enigma was cracked. The reason is Enigma was cracked and they did not know it was cracked. I hope I'm getting clear here. Because the way the game unfolded was, and this is beautifully represented in the movie called The Imitation Game. I invite you to watch it. The way the whole story unfolded was, after Turing actually cracked Enigma, they could decode all the messages. But they did not act on all the messages. They allowed for small battles to be lost, some compromise here and there, but overall gradually made the right actions to win the overall complete war. So you see what is important here? The point here is, if you are going to make extremely secure communication technology or whatever, you either make sure that it is theoretically impossible to crack. Nobody should be able to crack it, okay? But if it is going to be cracked, then make sure that you can immediately detect the crack. Build something into your technology that if somebody manages to crack it, you get a message, boss, your machine is gone. Then what you can do, you can simply throw away all those machines and build new ones. All right, that's the next step of security. This is where quantum mechanics comes in. All right, so what was lacking in classical? Something. That is where quantum mechanics seems to fill the gap. All right, so I hope one step of why people want to spend money on quantum mechanics is mildly clear here. Let's move on to the next step of this. I'll now want to take you through the basics of quantum communication, an actual experiment. By the way, the two terms quantum communication, quantum key distribution, we use them interchangeably. It's not entirely correct because key distribution is only a subset of communication, but for today's talk, they are the equivalent. Okay, so if I use the word QKD, it's the same thing as quantum communication. What do you want to do? Someone is sending some information to someone else. Okay, and if you are the bad guy or the good guy, whichever way you look at it, you want to steal it and you want to read it. Okay, now the names for the talk should be clear here. In the information theory research, when I was very young, I was looking at it. The picture would be A is sending a message to B. So it would be A and B. All the figures would be A and B. Later on, to put in some life into it, people start calling them Alice and Bob. You probably are familiar with the names Alice and Bob when you talk about quantum communication. I just indigenized the names to Alka and Babu, just to catch some attention. Okay. The person who is trying to get that message, hack into that message, used to be called C, A, B, C. Later on, that became Alice, Bob, and Charlie. But because the action is of eavesdropping, some people felt the name Eve will fit in better. To the chagrin of the feminists here, I'm sorry, I did not create it. But then the name came in Eve. Okay, so typically you will see Alice wants to send a message to Bob, and Eve wants to steal that message, to read that message. Okay. In my group, we always have a debate. What should be the indigenous name of Eve be? Because Eve has a negative connotation to her. The boys in the group say the name should be Avani. The girls in the group say, no, it should be Avi for Avinash. Okay, I'll let them take the call. But you understand the picture now, what we're going to do? Alice is going to send a message to Bob, and Eve is going to hack into it without making herself evident, right? Because she has to have a valid message in her pocket. Now, a very simple way of sending a message could be, for our talk, optical pulses. What I'm showing you bars here are pulses of light. Okay, like, they do Morse code using pulses and all. Okay, best way is to write a piece of paper and send it, but this is easier to discuss for me. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is Alice is sending a series of optical pulses. The height of the bar shows the intensity of the pulse. Okay, and why are there two heights? Because you have two bits, 0 and 1. So imagine that the smaller one is 0, the upper one is, the larger one is 1. So she's sending 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, and so on. That forms a key. Okay. And Bob receives that in his measurement device. And whenever he receives a larger intensity pulse, he writes 1, smaller intensity pulse, he writes 0, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now Eve wants to get into the game. She wants to steal the data. There's something very simple that exists in a lab, or probably everybody's home, is a mirror which will only reflect 50% of light. If you take a glass plate, just take a glass plate, you will see that you see a reflection, 4% of light is reflected, the rest is gone. You could have that glass plate sitting here. The word beam splitter is technical, but it just means it splits the beam. As simple as that, okay? So you have a glass plate here. Part of that light goes to Eve, okay? All she has to find out is how many pulses are at a certain level and how many are at the higher level. As soon as she does that, she starts writing 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, right? Rest of the beam goes through, okay? Rest of the beam goes through, and Bob receives then, and Bob also looks at the smaller pulse, the larger pulse, and writes down 0, 1, 1. Unfortunately, the string has been duplicated already. Bob may or may not know it. Now, if Bob is a smart man, let's assume he is, he will see that the intensity has dropped from the last time I did the experiment. Correct? So he says to Alice, hang on, I think there's a problem. I'm losing intensity. Now, Eve finds out that Bob has realized that the intensity has dropped. So Eve adds something called a light amplifier into his path quietly. I should tell you, in information theory, Eve is supposed to be technologically superlative. So when you work on information theory, the hacker is supposed to have all the technology in his or her hands. Okay, that's how you fight this problem. So now Eve has the ability to amplify the pulses that are going through this plate. She just amplifies it right enough. So what Bob receives is exactly what was received in the previous experiment. Now he doesn't know. All right? Eve is successfully copying all the pulses. She's happy. They are not, because eventually over 3-4 weeks, they realize all our messages are being hacked. Okay? And then they realize that this is the most common way of breaking a pulse. So why not do something special? Let's start reducing the intensity of these pulses. We will send the intensity which is much lower than what we are sending now. They keep doing that. This mirror is always going to break some of it into here until a certain limit is reached. Okay? This is where physics of light comes in. You can reduce the intensity of a pulse as low as possible until you reach a level called a single photon. Okay? Light is consists of particles. Okay. Now, nobody please examine me technically on these statements. Okay? Light consists of particles, the minimum of which has certain energy decided by the wavelength. I'm not going to details. Okay? Decided by the color. But Alice and Bob succeed in bringing these pulses down to single photons. The problem with single photons is they cannot be broken. A pulse can be broken into two, which Eve has done. Single photon cannot be broken. Okay. So how do you write your zeros and ones? You have to have two values, right? So they think of something smart. They say we have a property of light called polarization. Okay. We will use polarization of light. How many of you understand polarization of light? I don't want you to, but how many of you do? Okay, small fraction. Okay, you don't have to, but we'll come to that slowly. They use the property of light, which is polarization, which is a quantum property, thankfully, okay? And they say we don't need two levels of intensity or anything. We just need two polarization and a single photon. Now what's going to happen is, if you're sending a single photon, Alice is sending a single photon to Bob, this guy cannot break it. It either sends it here or it sends it there. Now it has no choice, okay? Now imagine what happens. If that photon goes to Bob, Eve hasn't received it, correct? If that photon goes to Eve, Bob doesn't receive it, doesn't become part of the key, right? So in a way, a large amount of security is already built in just by going to single photons, all right? But like I said, Eve is a very smart kid, and she will develop techniques to even break that, all right? Now what she does and how we defeat it, to go there, I'm going to need to apprise you of some basics of measurements in quantum mechanics. All right, there needs to be some introduction to measurements in quantum mechanics. There's something called a no-cloning theorem, which prevents the copying of a photon. I will not go there now. I'll probably come to that at the end of the talk. Okay, let's just briefly go through the concept of measurements in quantum mechanics. This is nothing quantum. This is a classical experiment. I'm showing you the solar system. Okay. Sun in the middle and all the planets in elliptical orbits, okay? If we go far away into space and decide to measure where is the planet, let's have one planet, Pluto. Where is the planet? You're going to find it on this orbit. Suppose you take a photograph, okay? You take a photo, you'll find it on this orbit. Your neighbor takes a photo, he finds it on the same position on the orbit. All of us take the photo, we'll find it there on the orbit. Some other time we'll find it somewhere else. But this thin orbit is exactly where our planet will be there, correct? That's the classical picture. That's how we live. We see each other, our classical world. That's the kind of measurements we expect to get. Let's go to the quantum world. You have all heard of what the hydrogen atom is. Typically introduced as a nucleus, which is one proton and the electron around it, a nice circular orbit. Now, I ask you to do an experiment to show me where the electron is. Take your camera. Of course, this is a quantum camera, which can make quantum measurements. You take a snapshot. You're going to measure that. You're going to measure a dot on this line. I'll ask all of you to simultaneously, yes. Not yet. I'm not yet created. We'll go there in a minute, okay? So I'm giving all of you various quantum cameras and start snapping. Okay, all of you will make a measurement of a dot. But at the end of it all, when you put all these dots together, you're going to see something like that. That is the quantum world. We don't create it. The electron can be anywhere in this region, and multiple people can make measurements at the same time and still identify different. Okay, when I say the word same time, it's makes me a little uncomfortable, but let's live with that approximation for a minute. Okay, you're going to see them all over the place around the nucleus, roughly within that circular area. Okay, this is because quantum measurements are always probabilistic. That's what you have to live with. You will never, it makes an experimentalist like me very uncomfortable because it's not a deterministic answer. If I ask you what we're doing at 8 o'clock today, you will tell me an answer, right? But you won't say, oh, I was probably eating this. You know what you're doing. But this probabilistic measurements is at the crux of quantum mechanics. Each dot here basically tells you what the probability of finding that electron is in that region. Here the dots are very dense, larger probability. Here the dots are rare, lower probability. That's the best you can get from a quantum mechanical experiment. Okay. Let's talk about some property of some quantum object. Okay, measurement of a property of a quantum object. I've shown you 4 cubes, okay, with some color. All right. And I'm going to ask you a question. What is the color of the cube? What is the color of this cube? Forget the shading. This. Perfect. That's the names I wanted. White, black, light gray, dark gray. What is the color of a cube? When I set up a classical experiment to measure the color of the cube, that is the question I'm asking through my experiment. If this was a quantum object, and if you are setting up an experiment, the question you are allowed to ask is the color of the cube black or white? You see the difference? First question has an open answer. What is the color of the cube? Quantum mechanics does not permit it. Quantum mechanics will allow you only to ask, is it this or is it that? It gives you a choice. I am giving you a choice. Tell me, is it this or is it that? And that is the choice this question is asking. Is the color of the cube black or white? Okay. So now you apply these quantum objects through that experiment. Answer you're going to get here is black. Answer you're going to get here is white. Answer you're going to get here is black. What happens here? The problem is you still get the answer black or white. What I'm saying is, even if you put the light gray box into your experiment, the experiment is going to say it is black or it is white because the experiment is set up like that. A quantum mechanical experiment is always a multiple choice question. You can't go beyond those choices. Okay. So this guy you measure, he will say either it is black or it is white. This guy you measure, he will say either it is black or it is white because that's all the choices you have given him. You have given the experiment. So does that mean quantum mechanics is wrong? No, sir. Quantum mechanics is probabilistic. You have to help it by designing the right experiment. So what you would do is the following. The light gray color that I have created here was created by using 20% of black and 80% of white. Okay. The dark gray color is 20% white, 80% black. Okay. So what you got to do is you take multiple of identical light gray boxes, not one, multiple identical light gray boxes, and then put them into the experiment. Okay. And this is what happens. Now, each of them is identified as either white or black because that is the question you have asked. But over the multiple boxes, you will get the right probabilities. Because this light gray was 20% dark, 20% answers will be black, 80% will be white. Okay? These boxes were 80% black and 20% white. In the same experiment, you will get either black or white, but 20% will be white. You are using the probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics to get the right answer, but only after multiple measurements. All right? This is the term that my friend was using. A lot of objects in quantum mechanics are in a superposition state. A gray is loosely treated as a superposition of black and white. Okay? One of them was a 20-80 superposition. One of them was an 80-20 superposition. And then I put them through the quantum mechanical experiment. Individual boxes could not be measured correctly, but after 1,000 measurements, I got the right answer. Okay? You get a feel for what probabilistic problems in quantum mechanics are and how we tackle them. I hope you do. I hope you get some idea of it. Okay? I can also ask another question for the same experiment, and this is important. These are the same boxes. This is important, but it's difficult to explain in English. These are the same boxes, and we just asked the question, what is the color of the cube in the classical picture? In the quantum picture, I can always ask, is the color light gray or dark gray? Initially, we asked black or white. I can always ask light gray or dark gray. Now, I cannot explain how white can be broken into light gray or dark gray because that's our inability to talk about colors. But in quantum physics, you can always choose a different multiple choice set and ask the question, and the experiment will give answer in that multiple choice set. Okay? It's possible, and it is critical here because these choices set are what we call a basis. Now, my students are already laughing because I'm trying to explain in spoken English how to explain a basis. Basis, the word basis will come in my talk, okay? So I can't avoid not speaking it. Basis is what choices you're giving the experiment. Tell me the answer in this basis. So tell me the color of this box, either in black-white basis or light gray, dark gray basis. And the experiment will tell it. It will give it, okay? You just have to design the experiment smartly, all right? So that's quantum mechanics measurements in a nutshell, in 10 minutes, okay? I'll move further. Anything, ma'am? Anything, sir? Okay, I'll move further to take this picture into our Alice, Bob, Eve polarization picture. Where were we? Alice and Bob had decided that there's Eve sitting there. They had decided that we're going to send single photons, and we're going to use polarization as our trick of encoding zeros and ones. And from now on, I'm going to use qubit instead of bit. A qubit is just a fashionable term. Most of the times, we scientists like to introduce fashionable terms, okay, for very simple things. It's just a fashionable term for a bit. It stands for a quantum bit. Because now I'm going to use a quantum property like polarization, unlike intensity, I'm going to call my bit as qubit. It makes me feel good, that's all. Okay, so single photons are going, and I'm going to use polarization. So let's have a quick recap of what polarization does, okay? And this is also an introduction to polarization, which is not essential to, we don't need to remember what polarization is, but we just need to remember that there are two possibilities. Like black and white and light gray, dark gray, there are few possibilities, okay? So this is an experiment designed by someone in this is a commonly designed experiment, okay? This green line shows how the photon is going to come from one end to another. There is a device here. This whole setup, these three devices, is my measurement device. What this device does is, it has a special property. The polarization is discussed in terms of angles, okay? I will be using the term vertical polarization for vertical arrow, horizontal polarization for horizontal arrow. You don't need to actually understand what it is, okay? That's all we need to know, the angle and the orientation, okay? Now, this device here is the same beam splitter I showed you earlier, just that now it is sensitive to polarization, okay? How is it sensitive? If vertically polarized light comes in, it is always going to be transmitted, okay? Remember I told you single photons can either go here or go there. This is a special device. If the polarization is vertical, it will always transmit it, okay? So this guy will detect it. If it is horizontal, it will always reflect it, the same device, okay? So the 90-degree, the horizontal arrow is always going to come here. Vertical arrow is always going to go there. And let's look at this with a quick cartoon. I'm sending a horizontal one. This photon reaches the beam splitter, comes to this detector. Then next time I send a vertical one, it goes here, it goes to this detector. Very smooth, simple, okay? The detector will immediately tell you. By knowing which detector detected the photon, you can identify the polarization. If this guy detected, you will say, oh, it was vertical. If this guy detected, you will say, oh, this was horizontal. So good. But now if I send this angle, that is 45. This is 0, suppose. This is 90. I send 45. What happens now? Now the problem is, now we get into the gray zone. Okay, 45 is a superposition of 0 and 90. Now my setup is confused. It can send this either here or here. It just doesn't know that, okay? That's the light gray, dark gray superposition playing out in our experiment. That's what plays out here. Now the beam splitter can send this to either D1 or D2. This is an ambiguous measurement, okay? So what I'm saying is, in this setup, if I send a 45-degree arrow, it becomes an ambiguous measurement. Okay, so this 45 can be considered gray if 0 and 90 are black and white, okay? This setup is made only for unambiguous detection of vertical and horizontal polarizations. That part, I hope I could clarify to you. What we will do now is we will name our polarizations as qubit 0 or 1, okay? So let's say for convenience, angle 0, which is the vertical, looks like 1, so we'll call it 1, and 90 is called 0, okay? And like earlier, I said something like black-white basis. I will call this a rectangular or a plus basis. Why am I calling it a plus basis? Because if I draw the two angles, it forms a plus, correct? Vertical, horizontal forms a plus. I'll call it a plus basis. Remember, I said you can also ask a question, is it a light gray box or a dark gray box? I can ask the same thing here. I can also create a new setup, new experimental setup, which can measure either 45 degrees and 135 degrees unambiguously. That is like your light gray, dark gray basis coming into play. Okay, I can change this device, but the problem will be 0 and 90 will be unreliable. All right, so there are two ways I can create this setup. One in which I can unambiguously detect 0 and 90. The other one in which I can unambiguously detect 45, 135, which means the counterparts will be ambiguous. And that ambiguity plays out a very important role, okay? I hope I have walked you through angles and polarizations. Because based on this, that's all, based on this at all, there is a huge number of protocols which have been created and which are active right now. The meaning of protocol basically is some experimental technique in which you can use this single photons creation and measurement to send your message. The most common one is BB84. Okay, the reason I'm showing you this slide is because if you read popular literature, you will see many names, BB84, B90, B92, even in the newspapers you get them. So early on, the tradition was the name of the authors, you pick up the first letter and then the year when it was published. So BB84 stands for Bennett and Brassard. In 1984, they came out with it. The same Bennett came out with one in 92. It's called B92, and so on. Okay, E91 is Eckert 91. I will not cover entanglement right now. But what might interest some of you is that the BB84 was actually declared in India. In Bangalore, I don't know if you're aware of Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, IISc Bangalore. There was a conference in 1984. So Bennett and Brassard were there, and that's where they declared it first. So this picture is associated with the most commonly used protocol in communication. All right, this is side information, okay? Now, shall we go ahead and implement the BB84 together? Walk with me step by step, okay? It may sound technical, it really is not, okay? So what do you need hardware? Not much really. You just need the ability to create your single photons, okay, and give it the right polarization. We already know what qubit 1 and 0, how to call qubit 1 and 0. We already know vertical polarizations and 45, 135. We're kind of introduced that, okay? On the other side is Bob. He just needs the same detectors I showed you already. He just needs to be able to detect the polarizations and write down eventually the qubits sent, 0, 1, 1, 0, okay? There's something unfamiliar that you will see, PC. PC is a technical device which allows you to choose the polarization. Forget what it is, okay? So, shall we go ahead and implement the BB84, all of us? What is the key here? For our discussion, the key is a simple random string of 1 and 0. Write down some random 1s and 0s on your piece of paper. That becomes a key for us, okay? So let's say Alice decides one day that I'm writing a random strings of 1s and 0s. A small disclaimer, this is not the final key. We'll come to that. It's a random strings of 1s and 0s. She did not think of how to write the order in. It's just 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, and so on, okay? Alice has the choice to decide whether I will send it 090 basis or 45, 135. It's her choice, okay? And she doesn't put much thought in it. She just writes down a random string which decides what basis she's sending in, okay? Now you understand plus and cross, I believe. Plus means the polarization is going to be 090. Cross means 45, 135, okay? She writes that down randomly. But once you fix the value of the qubit, and once you fix the basis, then the angle has to be fixed automatically, right? And this is the key. Oh, sorry, this is not very visible, but this says basis, qubit 1, qubit 0, okay? What it is if Alice decides to have qubit 1, and she says, I'm sending it in the plus basis, then the qubit 1 has to have angle 0. So that means that photon has to be vertical. So she sends a vertical photon with angle 0, okay? The second choice of Alice was, I'll only discuss 4 cases, okay? Second choice was the qubit 0, but in a cross basis. Qubit 0 in a cross basis is an angle of 135, which is what she gave to the photon. Third photon is qubit 0 in a plus basis. Qubit 0 in a plus basis is 90, so that's a 90-degree angle. And similarly, 1 in cross, which is qubit 1 in cross is 45, so the fourth photon is at a 45-degree angle. That's how she is sending all these photons. On the other side is Bob. Bob knows nothing. Bob knows nothing what Alice is doing. He's just sitting with his setup. He's receiving photons, okay? He has to make a choice, not an educated choice. He just has to make a random choice. In what basis I will be observing this? In other words, shall I measure the box color in black-white basis or light gray, dark gray basis? That's his choice, okay? And he writes down a random string of bases, just randomly. Cross, cross, plus, plus, cross, plus. Okay, he's aware of the ambiguities. We all know the ambiguities that come in, right? He's aware of that. Now what happens? A photon with angle 0 comes into a cross basis, and now he doesn't know that, but we know this, that the angle 0 does not fall in the cross basis at all. In the cross basis, you only have 45, 135, which means the answer is ambiguous. We know that. Poor Bob doesn't know that because his device will always give some answer. Okay. And his device gives 1. He doesn't know it is wrong. We know it. Okay. The second photon that comes through, Alice sent it at 135. Bob decided to use a cross basis. So in the cross basis, 135 corresponds to qubit 0 unambiguously. So he gets an answer 0. He just doesn't know that it is unambiguous. You understand? Bob gets the numbers. He doesn't know which are right, which are wrong. The third one was 90 in the plus basis. That is 90. In the plus basis, it corresponds to 0. He does get a 0. Fourth one was now 45. Bob measured it in the plus basis. Unfortunately, there's no 45 in the plus basis. He gets some random answer 0, which he writes down. He doesn't know it is wrong. Got it? So now Bob has managed to write down some qubits. 100, 110. Okay. He doesn't know whether they're right or wrong. Okay, so this is where they actually talk to each other, which means they get to the public channel. Now what Alice and Bob do is they actually call each other up and ask, what basis did you use to send your photon? I want to verify this. Okay, this communication is done on a public channel. After this phone call, now they ask the question, is the basis same or not? Okay, so in the first case, Alice used plus, Bob used cross. So say no. This is not the same basis. Next one, luckily, the bases used are the same, which is yes, and so on and so forth. Okay, now Bob knows which qubits are unreliable, because now he knows which basis was wrongly chosen by me, purely accidentally, and they know which qubits to eliminate from this, wherever you see a Y, that's the agreement in basis, so those qubits will remain. Wherever you see an N, that's the disagreement in basis, ambiguous answer. They may match, guys, they may match, the values may match, but you can't rely on them. Okay, so from 12 qubits, we ended up with 6 qubits. And you see already the answers agree perfectly. 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0. In a way, the communication is complete. Whatever key Alice wanted to send, and this is the key, okay? At the moment, this is the key. They decide that these 6 qubits will form our key. In principle, the communication is complete. But there is one critical step that they go through now, okay? And that is called data check. Because we still don't know if there was an Eve present somewhere in between. What is the consequence of Eve will become clear now, okay? So there's a step called data check, in which they choose, out of these 6 qubits, I want to publicly compare 3. Okay, now that's blasphemous, right? You don't publicly discuss qubits. That's the real secret part. But they make that sacrifice. They publicly discuss few qubits, so they choose to discuss this, why, yes, yes, yes. So Alice will ask Bob, was this 0? He says yes. Was this 1? He says yes. Was this 1? He says yes. All of them agree. So they then know that, okay, our security is intact. So then let's use the ones we did not discuss. You never use something that is discussed publicly. Remember, Eve is keeping track of all channels except the quantum channel. Okay. So in this experiment, they just end up with 0, 1, 0. Those 3 qubits are the actual key. Okay, because you compromise 3 qubits from that. Why did they do that? Why did they do that? Why did they sacrifice 3 qubits? Answer is here. Suppose Eve is present in the game. Okay. What does Eve do? Eve finds a way of measuring Alice's qubit and finds a way of sending it to Eve, right? To Bob. Because Alice and Bob have to continue communicating. Which means Eve acts like Bob for Alice. Eve acts like Alice for Bob. Got it? So these two are basically Eve. Okay? Except there's one problem. Alice is never going to call Eve and tell what basis she has used. Are you getting me? Bob is never going to call Eve and ask what basis you are giving me, right? Which means the basis comparison will happen between Alice and Bob, and Eve just has to get lucky that the basis is same. You saw that mismatch of basis gives ambiguous answers, right? And Eve is not allowed to compare with Alice or Bob. What does it do? If you look at how many bases exist, 2 bases exist. One is light gray, dark gray, one is white, black. If you choose wrongly, 50% error introduced right there, correct? There's another source of error, which is even if you use the wrong basis, you can get accidentally right answer. That's 1 in 2 again, so that's 50%. What means is overall 15 to 50, this experiment introduces 25% errors even if Alice and Bob agree with the basis. So Alice calls up Bob. They says, yes, our bases are agreeing, but the qubits don't agree. Why is that? Because Eve was sitting in between. She tried to duplicate us. I hope I'm getting this point correct. Is this correct? Am I getting across here? Alice will not communicate with Eve what the bases are. Eve will not communicate with Bob. Alice and Bob will communicate what the bases are. So the bases agree, but the qubits don't agree. That is the smoking gun. This 25% error that gets between the data, even though the bases are the same, that is the smoking gun that somebody is sniffing into our communication. That is the red flag which gets raised. Okay, 25% is a very loose threshold. People actually apply much stricter thresholds like 9% or even 4.5% when they reject the data. So although your bases have agreed, I got 5% error, reject it all. Don't use it because it was hacked into. Okay, let's set up a new experiment. All this came purely because of probabilistic nature of quantum measurements, okay, and the possibilities of quantum superpositions, which will always give some answer. It will be right only if you know the experiment was set up right. And that is the crux of quantum communication. The fundamental nature of quantum measurements, fundamental behavior of quantum objects is at the center of quantum communication. You cannot defeat it. There's no way you can set up an experiment in which, regardless of the basis, you will get the answer that was sent by Alice. Have I been able to get across to you to some extent where this security came in? We will continue discussing this after the main part of the talk is present. How am I doing on time, sir? I have 10 minutes, perfect. Okay. This is what I actually wanted to convey to you. Where are we going with this? We have built this various protocols using polarization, and people now want to make an entire internet, a global internet, purely based on quantum data. No chance of breaking into it, no chance of hacking, okay? And one design that we are working towards depends on something called free space long distance. Okay, I'll explain this term. Some of you might think that if you want to send photons, just use optical fibers, right? Because we have this whole network of fibers across the globe already. Our internet runs off those fibers. But unfortunately, it turns out single photons are not very good friends of fibers. Okay, they kind of change their polarization and all. So people want to do it through free space. So this is actually an experiment sitting here, another experiment sitting here, and these are a series of photons sent. The problem with this model is that there is a very limited distance you can cover just by going by free space because of this turbulence on the ground and because of Earth's curvature. Okay, if you want to go farther and farther, you have to take your experiments higher and higher, which is not feasible, right? And that is why the longest experiment done on the ground was 144 kilometers, and already the 2 experiments were 2.5 kilometers in the ground. Now, you don't want to go to Everest to set up communication experiments, right? So the solution for this is use a satellite. What is the idea? You send your data to the satellite. Satellite sends that data to the ground. There's a huge assumption here that the satellite is a friend. And if satellite is, that's why the name is a trusted node. You call that a trusted node. If satellite belongs to Eve, then I think you're asking for trouble. Okay. And another point that you should remember is that you can't have the same key because keys cannot be duplicated. Something technical I did not go into. Okay. It's not possible to duplicate a key. Again, quantum mechanics. That's called the no cloning theorem. You can't create a clone in quantum mechanics. Okay. So basically, there are 2 different keys, but thankfully, there are easy Boolean mathematical operations which will enable us to create a common key. Based on this simple design, people have proposed creating uplinks with the satellite, downlinks with the satellite, and ultimately, like what Elon Musk is doing, create an entire network of quantum satellites. The boost to this idea came because of the Chinese satellite. I don't know how many of you are keeping track of this. China sent a satellite long back. It has given some very promising results. Okay, it's called Mischias. I will drop all the technicalities. It was just proposed after the first long distance results in 2003, and 2016 it was launched. And what they have shown is what the world is about to do actually. It's in a low Earth orbit, which means something like 500 to 1600 kilometers. And it's sun synchronous. it has to go over the same place at the same local time. And this is by design. I'll tell you why. Okay. And it's carrying various payloads for different experiments. These are the images of payloads, not of concern for us. But this is an interesting point I want to tell you. Can you imagine there's an object on the ground and an object 1,500 kilometers away, and that is looking exactly at each other in the eye? Okay. So this was obviously the biggest challenge. And it was worked out by sending two lasers. The satellite sends a green laser to the ground. The ground sends a red laser to the satellite. And only when the two laser beams are optimally received by the other side, and you get that green signal that, okay, we are seeing each other's lasers, then the quantum data are sent. Okay. It's not a continuous communication. And it's broken. And I'll tell you how they counter it. The pointing accuracy in this setup was 2 microrads. Now, to give you a feel for it, imagine a 10 rupee coin. You have a 10 rupee coin. It's kept there, and you are pointing accurately at the 10 rupee coin, but it's at a distance of 100 kilometers. So that's the accuracy that you need to achieve this experiment. It's doable. They have done it. This has been a major boost for the community. Okay, that's a photograph of the actual experiment going on. You see the red laser going into the sky. As the satellite is moving from one into some point here, the red laser is tracking it, and there's a green spot there. It's actually the green laser coming back to ground. Once the two lasers agree, oh, yes, I have received, quantum data is sent. Okay. But then this, the satellite doesn't stay. It's not geosynchronous. It's not geostationary. It'll keep going. How many of you have seen the ISS, International Space Station, in the sky? You see that, right? 5 to 7 minutes it will go. Keep going around. It's like that. So basically, the way it works is when it comes about 5 degrees from the horizon, you start the ground laser. It goes slightly ahead. You start the satellite laser. And when the lasers agree, for about 5 minutes, you will have some communication, that too broken, intermittent, and then it goes into the eclipse again, goes behind the Earth. And that is why you need that sun-synchronous orbit, because it has to go over the ground station multiple times. Over many, many, many rounds, you slowly build the key. That's how the key is built. This is typical optics apparatus which is on the satellite, also in our labs. And this is the way the data look like. If I just want to give you very simple meaning of this, the x-axis is time. So 0 to 300 seconds, that's 5 minutes. This is the distances of the satellite, 1,200 kilometers from the Earth, and this is 600 kilometers from the Earth. These satellites' orbits are obviously elliptical. And you see the receiver is good at the top position, but a lot of noise, and it's pretty bad at the horizons because the atmosphere is obviously thicker at the horizon. And over again, over several days, you build the key. So as of now, that has been successfully demonstrated. People are working towards maximizing the key rate, what we call the bit rate. And the idea is to build an entire quantum network using satellites. This is just a representative image of how you can communicate simultaneously with 2 points. And using something called entanglement, I didn't go through it in details, maybe later. And based on that, there are many new proposals that have come out. Some of them are actually in action. China has a couple of plans already. Germany, Canada, Italy, France, a variety of satellites are being made and will be launched soon in the near time. ISRO has plans of its own quantum satellite soon. I don't know what the timelines are, but let's hope in a few years from now, we actually have a network of quantum satellites. Our group is not into satellites. We are slightly more modest, depending on our reach. So we are trying to do long distance free space using a balloon. Are you aware of weather balloons, stratospheric balloons? These balloons can hover at a distance of about 40-45 kilometers. TIFR, I don't know if you ever heard a talk about this. TIFR has a facility where we make stratospheric balloons and do our own experiments in the stratosphere. We are on our way to make quantum payloads to the balloons, to take over the balloons. So we think we can connect about 1,000 kilometers using a balloon within the country. I hope to get that project completed. I'll need your best wishes for that. For now, I'll thank you for your attention, and I'll be glad to take questions. I hope I could get through to you. What is this? He doesn't have a quantum satellite. He's doing standard lasers, actually RF. As of now, I don't know of actual commercial communication using optical. Definitely not quantum, but they're using RF. But I'm not an expert.
How far are you from actually commercial?
Quantum? Fiber-based quantum is commercial already, okay, because that happens in small areas. Free space, I don't think it's commercial, but again, I'm not aware of the latest on that.
That's the gate.
Absolutely, always. And if you look at the pricing, I'm told, free space has a better deal. If you look at the ultimate pricing, when you go long distances, people work out, and the idea is apparently free space will be cheaper than fiber. That is one driving force. Because you can't have a fiber going far away. There are limitations.
So may I suggest that we take a tea break, then we can come back, assemble, and you can ask all your questions to Professor Sushil directly. So just a small break of 5-10 minutes, a tea break. We'll come back and we'll start the session again. Does
Okay,
that work?
I'm sure whatever works for them is fine.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually the usual format.
Okay, okay.
Okay, so let's have tea and we'll start. Yeah, it's up. It's 20 minutes.
इसको हटा दो क्या अभी?
How did that go?